Have you ever wondered what it feels like to watch your child get humiliated simply for existing in the wrong place? What happened to my son Marcus that Tuesday afternoon in downtown Chicago will make your blood boil. But stick around, because what those officers discovered about his mother changed everything. And I mean everything. You see, some people think they can judge a book by its cover. They thought they knew exactly who my 17-year-old son was the moment he walked into that jewelry store. They were wrong, dead wrong. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why you should never, ever underestimate someone based on appearances. But before I tell you what happened that day, let me paint you a picture of who Marcus really is. This isn't just some random teenager we're talking about. This is my son, a young man I raised to be respectful, hardworking, and determined. A kid who's never been in trouble with the law, never even gotten a detention at school. A boy who volunteers at the local community center every Saturday morning, helping elderly residents with their groceries and reading to children in the after-school program. Marcus Williams had been planning this moment for exactly 1 month. Not 3 months, not 6 months. One very focused, very determined month. Every single day after school, instead of hanging out with friends at Navy Pier or playing video games like most teenagers, he'd head straight to his job at the local Jewel Osco on 47th Street. Now, let me tell you about this job. It wasn't glamorous. 20 hours a week of stocking shelves, cleaning spills, dealing with difficult customers who treated him like he was invisible. The pay was minimum wage. $15 an hour in Chicago, and after taxes, he was taking home maybe $240 a week. But Marcus had a goal, and nothing was going to stop him from reaching it. My birthday was coming up, October 15th, and Marcus wanted to surprise me with something special. Not just any gift, but something that would show how much he appreciated everything I'd done for him over the years. Something that would make me cry happy tears, because that's what mothers do when their children surprise them with thoughtfulness. You have to understand something about my son. Marcus isn't the type to do things halfway. When he was 12 years old, he decided he wanted to learn guitar. Did he give up after a few weeks like most kids? No. He practiced every single day for 2 years until he could play Hendrix solos that would make your jaw drop. When he wanted to make the varsity basketball team as a sophomore, he spent every morning at 5 a.m. in the gym shooting free throws until his hands were raw. That's just who he is. When Marcus sets his mind on something, he follows through. So when he decided he wanted to buy me a birthday present, not just any present, but something that would show how much he appreciated everything I'd done for him, he was going to make it happen, no matter what it took. For 4 weeks straight, Marcus worked every shift they'd give him at Jewel Osco. While his friends were at parties or hanging out at the mall, he was scanning barcodes and helping elderly customers carry their groceries to their cars. While other kids his age were sleeping in on weekends, Marcus was up at 6 a.m., putting on his red Jewel Osco vest and heading to work. He saved every penny he could. He stopped buying lunch at school, packing peanut butter sandwiches instead. He walked to work instead of taking the bus, saving that $2.50 each way. He even stopped buying his favorite energy drinks, cutting out every unnecessary expense he could think of. His co-workers at Jewel Osco used to tease him about it. "Marcus, you're 17, his manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, would say. "Live a little. Buy yourself something nice. Get some new shoes. Take a girl to the movies." But Marcus would just smile and shake his head. "I'm saving for something important," he'd tell them. "Something for my mom." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had 3 teenagers of her own, would just smile and shake her head. "Your mama raised you right, Marcus. She's lucky to have you." And she was right. I was lucky. I am lucky. But that Tuesday afternoon, I almost lost my mind thinking about how unlucky we both were to live in a world where my son could be treated like a criminal for the crime of shopping while black. That Tuesday morning, Marcus woke up with a sense of purpose, unlike anything he'd felt before. He'd finally saved enough money, $800 in cash that he'd deposited into his checking account the day before. He had it all planned out. After school, he'd take the Red Line downtown to the Magnificent Mile, find the perfect necklace, and surprise me for my birthday that weekend. He even researched jewelry stores online for hours, reading reviews, comparing prices, looking at photos of different necklaces. He wanted something elegant, but not too flashy. Something that would make me feel special, but wouldn't break his budget. Something that said, "I love you, Mom," without being too sentimental for a 17-year-old boy to give his mother. As he got dressed that morning, putting on his best jeans, the dark blue ones without any holes, and a button-down shirt his grandmother had bought him for Christmas, Marcus felt proud. Proud of the work he'd put in, proud of the sacrifice he'd made, proud that he could do something nice for his mother. He looked at himself in the mirror, straightened his collar, and smiled. Today was going to be a good day. Today was going to be the day he made his mother proud. If only he'd known what was waiting for him. Marcus's day at Lincoln Park High School went by in a blur. He couldn't concentrate in his AP history class where they were discussing the civil rights movement. Ironic, considering what was about to happen to him. He barely touched his lunch, too excited about his afternoon plans to eat. His best friend Kevin noticed his distraction. "Yo, Marcus, you good?" Kevin asked during lunch. "You seem like you're somewhere else today." Marcus grinned. "I'm about to surprise my mom with the best birthday present ever. I've been saving up for a month." "What did you get her?" Kevin asked, genuinely curious. "I'm going to buy her a diamond necklace," Marcus said proudly, "from one of those fancy stores on Michigan Avenue." Kevin's eyes widened. "Bro, that's going to cost serious money." "You sure you can afford that?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Kevin his bank account balance. $847.32. Every penny earned through hard work and sacrifice. "Damn, Marcus," Kevin said, impressed. "Your mom's going to cry when she sees that." "That's the plan," Marcus said, smiling. What neither of them knew was that in just a few hours I would indeed be crying, but not for the reason Marcus intended. The final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., and Marcus practically ran to his locker. He grabbed his jacket, checked his wallet one more time to make sure his debit card was there, and headed for the Red Line station. The train ride downtown took about 30 minutes, and Marcus spent the entire time looking up jewelry stores on his phone, reading reviews, and getting more and more excited about his surprise. The Magnificent Mile was bustling as usual that Tuesday afternoon. October in Chicago is beautiful. The leaves were changing colors, the air was crisp but not cold, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings. Tourists were snapping photos in front of the Chicago Theater. Business people were rushing to meetings with their phones pressed to their ears, and shoppers were carrying bags from Nordstrom, Saks, and Tiffany & Co. But Marcus walked with a different kind of purpose. This wasn't window shopping or casual browsing. This was a mission. He passed by the Apple Store where a crowd had gathered around the latest iPhone display. He walked past the Nike flagship store where he would have loved to buy himself a new pair of shoes but had resisted the temptation for weeks. Every step brought him closer to his destination, Sterling and Associates Fine Jewelry. He'd chosen this store specifically after reading dozens of online reviews. It wasn't the most expensive store on the Strip. That would be Tiffany & Co. or Cartier, but it had a reputation for quality pieces and good customer service. The reviews mentioned friendly staff who were willing to work with customers on different budgets, knowledgeable salespeople who could help you find the perfect piece, and a welcoming atmosphere that made shopping for jewelry a pleasant experience. "Great selection and even better service," one review had said. "The staff made me feel welcome from the moment I walked in. They worked with my budget and helped me find something beautiful for my wife," another review read. "Highly recommend." Marcus had read review after review like this, feeling confident that he'd chosen the right place. He wanted this experience to be perfect, and everything he'd read suggested that Sterling and Associates would treat him with the respect and courtesy he deserved as a paying customer. As Marcus approached the store, he felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because this was a big moment for him. This was the culmination of weeks of hard work and planning. This was his chance to show his mother how much he loved and appreciated her. He stopped in front of the store's large windows, admiring the displays. Necklaces, bracelets, and rings sparkled under the carefully positioned lights. Everything looked expensive, elegant, perfect. The window displays were artfully arranged, with pieces ranging from simple gold chains to elaborate diamond sets that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and checked his reflection in the window. He looked good, clean, well-dressed, respectable. He looked like exactly what he was, a young man with money to spend and a specific purpose in mind. "You've got this," he whispered to himself. The same thing he used to say before basketball games or big tests at school. "You worked for this. You earned this." Marcus pushed open the heavy glass door and immediately felt the cool air conditioning wash over him. The store was beautiful, marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, glass display cases that seemed to go on forever, and soft classical music playing in the background. Everything smelled like expensive perfume and leather, and the atmosphere was exactly what Marcus had hoped for: elegant, sophisticated, welcoming. The sound of his sneakers on the marble floor seemed to echo louder than it should have, but Marcus didn't let that bother him. He was here to make a purchase, and he had every right to be in this store. The store was empty, except for one person. A middle-aged woman behind the main counter with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a navy blue blazer that looked like it cost more than Marcus made in a month. She was arranging something in one of the display cases when he entered, and she looked up with what Marcus initially thought might be a welcoming smile. But as she took in his appearance, his sneakers, his jeans, his young face, something in her expression changed. It wasn't the warm, welcoming look he'd expected based on the online reviews. It was something else entirely. Something that made his stomach tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite identify. But Marcus had been raised to be polite and respectful, no matter how others treated him. So he smiled his most genuine smile and approached the counter with confidence. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice clear and confident. "I'm looking for a necklace for my mother's birthday." The woman, her nameplate read Mrs. Patterson in elegant gold lettering, looked him up and down slowly, deliberately. Her eyes lingered on his sneakers, traveled up to his jeans, paused at his shirt, and finally met his eyes with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as unmistakable suspicion. "A necklace," she repeated slowly, as if the words didn't quite make sense coming from him. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, maintaining his polite tone despite the growing discomfort in his stomach. "Something with diamonds, if possible. Something that shows how much I appreciate her." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. She glanced around the empty store, then back at Marcus, as if she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. "And what's your budget for this appreciation?" she asked, her voice carrying a tone that Marcus couldn't quite place, but didn't like. Marcus had prepared for this question. He'd done his research and knew that a nice diamond pendant could range anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on the size and quality of the stone. He'd also read that it was normal for salespeople to ask about budget so they could show appropriate options. "I have about $800 to spend," he said honestly, pulling out his wallet to show that he was serious. "I know that might not buy the biggest diamond, but I'm hoping to find something beautiful within that range." Now, here's where things should have gone smoothly. A good salesperson would have smiled, congratulated him on saving up for such a thoughtful gift, and started showing him options within his budget. They would have asked about his mother's style preferences, whether she liked gold or silver, whether she preferred simple or elaborate designs. That's what the online reviews had led him to expect. Instead, Mrs. Patterson did something else entirely. She crossed her arms. $800, she said, her voice flat and skeptical. "And you have this money? How?" The question hit Marcus like a slap in the face. Not because it was necessarily inappropriate. Salespeople probably needed to qualify customers' budgets all the time, but because of the way she asked it. The tone, the implication behind the words, the assumption that a young black man couldn't possibly have $800 to spend on jewelry through legitimate means. Marcus felt his face getting warm, but he kept his composure. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before. The suspicious looks in stores, the assumption that he didn't belong in certain places, the subtle racism that followed him through his daily life. But he'd never experienced it quite so blatantly, and never when he was trying to do something so innocent and loving. "I work at Jewel Osco," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and respectful. "I've been saving for a month. I work 20 hours a week after school and on weekends." Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked more skeptical. She glanced at his clothes again, as if trying to reconcile the idea of a grocery store worker having $800 to spend on jewelry. "Jewel Osco," she repeated, her voice carrying a note of disdain. "The grocery store." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, feeling his patience beginning to wear thin but determined not to show it. "I work there after school. I've been saving every penny for this." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, just staring at him. Marcus could feel her eyes taking in every detail of his appearance, judging him, evaluating him, trying to decide whether he was telling the truth or whether he was some kind of threat. "And you have this money with you?" she asked finally. "Cash?" "I have my debit card," Marcus said, reaching into his wallet and pulling out the blue Chase card with his name printed clearly across the bottom. "Marcus Williams. The money's in my checking account. I can show you my bank app if you need to see the balance." Mrs. Patterson stared at the card like it was a piece of evidence in a criminal case. She didn't reach for it to examine it more closely. She didn't ask to see his ID to verify that it was actually his card. She didn't ask about his mother's style preferences or what kind of necklace he had in mind. She didn't do any of the normal things a salesperson would do when a customer was ready to make a purchase. Instead, she did something that would change everything. She picked up the phone. Marcus watched in growing confusion and alarm as Mrs. Patterson turned slightly away from him and dialed a number. She spoke quietly, but not quietly enough for Marcus to miss what she was saying. "Hello. This is Patterson from Sterling & Associates on Michigan Avenue," she said, her voice low but audible. "I have a situation here. Young black male, alone, looking at expensive jewelry. He claims he has money, but something doesn't feel right. I think you should send someone over quickly." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He heard every word, understood exactly what was happening, but couldn't quite believe it. This woman, this stranger who knew nothing about him except the color of his skin, had just called the police on him for trying to buy his mother a birthday present. His first instinct was to leave, to walk out of that store and never look back, to go home and tell me what happened and let me handle it, to find another jewelry store where he would be treated with respect. But then he thought about the month of work, the money he'd saved, the surprise he'd planned for my birthday. He thought about how proud he'd been just minutes earlier, walking down Michigan Avenue with his hard-earned money, ready to buy something beautiful for his mother. No, he wasn't going to let this woman's prejudice ruin that moment. He wasn't going to let her racism drive him away from something he'd worked so hard for. So Marcus stayed. He put his debit card back in his wallet and stood there, waiting. His heart was racing, his palms were sweating, but he stayed. He had every right to be in that store, every right to shop for jewelry, every right to spend his hard-earned money however he chose. Mrs. Patterson hung up the phone and turned back to him with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll just check our inventory in the back," she lied smoothly. "Wait right here, and I'll see what we have in your price range." She emphasized the words price range in a way that made it clear she didn't believe he could afford anything in the store. Then she disappeared through a door behind the counter, leaving Marcus alone in the store with his thoughts and his growing sense of dread. Marcus looked around at the beautiful displays, at the sparkling jewelry under the lights, at the elegant surroundings that had seemed so welcoming just minutes before. Now it all felt different. Cold, hostile, like he was somewhere he didn't belong, somewhere he was being watched and judged and found wanting. But Marcus wasn't going anywhere. He'd worked too hard for this moment, saved too long, planned too carefully. Whatever was about to happen, he was going to face it with dignity and grace, the way I'd raised him to handle difficult situations. He had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, his mother, me, Elena Williams, would be walking through that door with 4 FBI agents behind her. While Marcus waited in that store, trying to process what had just happened, Mrs. Patterson was in the back room making another phone call. This one was to her manager, Robert Sterling, who was at the company's other location in Oak Brook. "Mr. Sterling, it's Patricia," she said, her voice nervous but trying to sound confident. I have a situation at the Michigan Avenue store. I called the police on a customer, but now I'm second-guessing myself. He seems articulate, well-dressed, but you know how it is downtown. Better safe than sorry, right? Robert Sterling, who had been in the jewelry business for 25 years and had built his reputation on treating every customer with respect, felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Patricia, what exactly did this customer do that made you call the police?" he asked. "Well, he's young and black, and he was looking at expensive pieces, and he claims he has $800 to spend, but he works at a grocery store, and I just thought—" She trailed off, realizing how weak her reasoning sounded when she said it out loud. "Patricia," Robert said, his voice stern, "please tell me you didn't call the police on a customer simply because he's black." No, it's not like that," she said quickly. "It's just, you know how it is. Young people, expensive jewelry, it just seemed suspicious." Robert Sterling closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He'd been afraid something like this might happen. Patricia Patterson had been with the company for 8 years, and while she was generally a good employee, he'd noticed some troubling attitudes in her interactions with certain customers. He'd been meaning to address it, but he'd put it off, hoping it would resolve itself. Now it looked like his procrastination was about to cost him dearly. "I'm coming down there right now," he told her. "Do not do anything else until I arrive. And Patricia, if this customer is legitimate, and I suspect he is, we're going to have a serious problem on our hands." What Mrs. Patterson didn't know was that her 911 call had been logged and routed to the nearest patrol unit. Officers Davis and Martinez, who were just finishing up a routine traffic stop 6 blocks away on State Street. Officer Davis, a 15-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, had heard calls like this before. Suspicious person at an upscale store. Employee concerned about potential theft. In his experience, these calls usually resulted in one of 3 outcomes. The person left when police arrived, they were asked to leave and complied, or they were arrested for trespassing if they refused to go. Davis had developed what he considered a practical approach to these situations. Go in strong, show presence, establish control, and resolve the situation quickly. He'd found that most suspicious people were easily intimidated by the sight of police uniforms and would leave without causing trouble. "Probably just another kid trying to case the place," he told his partner, Officer Martinez, as they drove toward Sterling and Associates. "We go in, show the flag, and he'll either leave on his own or we'll escort him out." Officer Martinez, who had been Davis's partner for 3 years, had learned to follow his lead in these situations. Martinez was newer to the force, having joined the Chicago PD only 5 years earlier, and he trusted Davis's experience and judgment. "Think he'll give us trouble?" Martinez asked. "They usually don't when they see the uniforms," Davis replied confidently. "But we'll be ready either way. These jewelry store calls are usually pretty straightforward." What neither officer knew was that the suspicious person they were about to confront was the son of the most powerful law enforcement official in Chicago. They had no idea that their routine response to a prejudiced store clerk's phone call was about to become the biggest mistake of their careers. They also had no idea that their conversation was being recorded by their patrol car's dashboard camera, or that their approach to this situation would soon be scrutinized by internal affairs, the FBI, and eventually the media. As they pulled up outside Sterling and Associates, Davis and Martinez could see through the large windows into the store. They could see a young black man standing near the counter, looking around at the displays. He appeared calm, well-dressed, and completely non-threatening. "Doesn't look like much of a threat," Martinez observed. "That's what they want you to think," Davis replied, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "Stay alert. These situations can turn quickly." They got out of their patrol car and approached the store with the kind of aggressive confidence that had served them well in other situations but was completely inappropriate for this one. Meanwhile, back at the FBI building, I was having what should have been a routine Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office on the 17th floor, reviewing case files and preparing for a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office about a major corruption investigation we'd been working on for 6 months. But I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Marcus and his big shopping trip. I was so proud of him for working so hard and saving his money for something meaningful. I was excited about his surprise, even though I already knew what he was planning. Mothers have a way of figuring these things out. At 4:30 p.m., I decided to take a quick break and text Marcus to see how his shopping was going. "How's the jewelry shopping going, sweetheart?" I typed. "Find anything good?" I sent the message and waited for a response. Marcus was usually quick to text back, especially when he was excited about something. But 5 minutes passed, then 10, and I hadn't heard anything. I tried calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. That's when I started to worry. Marcus always answered when I called, and he always kept his phone charged. For it to go straight to voicemail meant either his phone was dead or he was in a situation where he couldn't answer. I tried calling again. Voicemail again. Now I was concerned. I called my assistant into my office. "I need you to track my son's phone," I told him. "Something's not right." My assistant, Agent Thompson, pulled up our family tracking app on his computer. The FBI has access to sophisticated tracking technology, but for family purposes, we use the same apps that most parents use to keep track of their teenagers. "He's at Sterling and Associates on Michigan Avenue," Thompson said, reading the location off his screen. "That's a jewelry store in the Magnificent Mile district." "I know where he is," I replied, feeling my anxiety growing. "But why isn't he answering his phone?" Thompson pulled up the live traffic cameras in the area, something we could do through our law enforcement access to the city's surveillance network. "Ma'am," he said, his voice suddenly tense, "there are police units outside that location." My blood ran cold. "What kind of police units?" "2 patrol cars, and it looks like—" "Yes, officers are inside the building." I was already grabbing my jacket and badge. "Get a team together," I told Thompson. "We're going there now." "Ma'am, should I call the Chicago PD and find out what's going on?" "No," I said firmly. "We're going there ourselves. If my son is in trouble, I want to see it firsthand." Within minutes, I was in the back of an FBI SUV with 3 agents racing toward the Magnificent Mile. My heart was pounding with a mixture of worry and rage. I'd spent 20 years in federal law enforcement. I'd seen corruption, prejudice, and abuse of power in all its forms. But I'd never imagined that my own son might become a victim of it. As we drove through downtown Chicago, I tried calling Marcus one more time. Voicemail again. Now I was really scared. Back at Sterling and Associates, Marcus was still waiting in the store, unaware that his mother was racing toward him with a team of federal agents. He'd been standing there for almost 15 minutes now, and Mrs. Patterson still hadn't returned from the back room. The classical music continued to play softly, and the jewelry continued to sparkle under the lights, but the atmosphere felt increasingly tense. Marcus could feel his anxiety growing with each passing minute. He kept looking toward the front windows, half expecting to see police cars pulling up outside. He was right to be worried. At 4:47 p.m., Marcus heard the sharp squeal of tires outside the store. Through the large windows, he saw not 1, but 2 Chicago police patrol cars pulling up to the curb. His stomach dropped like a stone. Marcus watched in growing alarm as 4 police officers got out of the cars. 2 of them, Officers Davis and Martinez, headed straight for the store entrance. The other 2 positioned themselves outside, as if they were expecting some kind of confrontation. Marcus's mouth went dry. His heart started pounding so hard he could hear it over the classical music. Every instinct told him to run, but he forced himself to stay calm. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was a customer in a store, trying to buy a gift for his mother. There was no reason to panic, but deep down, he knew better. Deep down, he knew exactly why those police officers were there. The store's glass door burst open with such force that it rattled in its frame and set off a small chime that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent store. 2 Chicago police officers stormed in like they were responding to an armed robbery in progress. Officer Davis, a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair and cold blue eyes, led the way. He was moving with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested he'd done this many times before. Officer Martinez, younger and leaner but equally intimidating, followed close behind, his hand resting on his weapon. Both officers were wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors. Both had their hands positioned near their weapons. Both were looking at Marcus like he was public enemy number one, like he was a dangerous criminal who needed to be subdued immediately. "Hands where I can see them!" Officer Davis shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Marcus's world stopped. For a moment, he couldn't process what was happening. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. They couldn't be talking to him. He was just shopping. He was just trying to buy his mother a birthday present. "Excuse me?" Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me. Hands up now," Davis repeated, his voice even louder and more aggressive than before. Marcus slowly raised his hands, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. He was in a jewelry store trying to buy a necklace for his mother. How had this turned into a police confrontation? "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm and respectful, despite the terror that was coursing through his veins. "I'm just shopping for my mother. I'm a customer here." Officer Martinez stepped forward and grabbed Marcus's debit card, which was still sitting on the counter where he'd placed it earlier. "Where'd you get this?" he demanded, holding up the card like it was evidence of a crime. "It's mine," Marcus replied, his voice starting to shake despite his efforts to stay calm. "I work at Jewel Osco. I saved up for a month to buy my mom a birthday present." The officers exchanged a look that said they'd heard this story before and didn't believe a word of it. It was a look that said they'd already decided Marcus was guilty of something, and now they just needed to figure out what. "Turn around," Davis ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Hands on the counter." "Officers, please, I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said, feeling tears starting to sting his eyes. "I'm just trying to buy my mom a necklace. I have money. I can show you." "I said turn around," Davis shouted, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder and spinning him around roughly. Marcus felt the tears threatening to spill over, but he blinked them back. He wouldn't give these officers the satisfaction of seeing him cry. He wouldn't let them break his spirit, no matter how scared he was. He turned around and placed his hands on the cold marble counter, feeling the smooth stone against his palms. The same counter where, just minutes earlier, he'd been excited to place his debit card and make a purchase that would make his mother happy. Now it felt like an altar where his dignity was being sacrificed. Officer Davis grabbed Marcus by the arm and pressed him against the counter with unnecessary force. "Any weapons on you?" he demanded. "No, sir, I'm not armed," Marcus replied, his voice shaking now despite his efforts to stay calm. "I'm 17 years old. I just want to buy my mom a birthday present." But they weren't listening. Officer Martinez was already patting him down roughly, checking his pockets, running his hands over Marcus's body like he was searching a dangerous criminal instead of a teenager with a debit card and a dream. "What's in the wallet?" Martinez asked, pulling Marcus's wallet from his back pocket without permission. "Just my ID and some cash," Marcus replied, feeling his dignity being stripped away piece by piece. "And my debit card, which you already took." That's when Officer Davis made the mistake that would end his career and change everything about this situation. He opened Marcus's wallet and started going through it methodically. Marcus's school ID from Lincoln Park High School, showing a smiling young man in a cap and gown from his junior year photo. His work ID from Jewel Osco, with the store logo and his employee number. His library card from the Chicago Public Library. A photo of me and him from last Christmas, both of us smiling in front of our tree. And then Davis found something that made him stop cold. Tucked behind Marcus's driver's license was an emergency contact card, the kind that parents give their kids in case something happens at school or work. A simple white card with my name and phone number, the kind of thing that most parents insist their children carry, but that most teenagers forget about until they need it. But this wasn't just any emergency contact card. In clear, bold letters, it read, "In case of emergency, contact Elena Williams, Director, FBI Chicago Field Office." Officer Davis stared at the card for a long moment, reading it over and over again as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. His face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. His hands started to shake slightly as the full implications of what he was reading began to sink in. "Martinez," he whispered, his voice suddenly shaky and uncertain. "We need to talk. Right now." But it was too late for whispered conversations, because at that exact moment, Marcus's phone started buzzing in his pocket. The caller ID, if anyone had bothered to look, would have shown Mom with a photo of me smiling. And at that same moment, 3 black FBI SUVs were pulling up outside Sterling and Associates, their tinted windows reflecting the late afternoon sun as they came to a stop at the curb. You see, I have a very specific routine when it comes to my son. It's a routine born out of 20 years in law enforcement, 20 years of seeing what can happen to people when they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, 20 years of understanding that the world can be a dangerous place for young black men, even when they're doing nothing wrong. Marcus always texts me when he gets somewhere safely, and he always answers when I call. It's a rule we established when he started taking public transportation by himself, a rule that served us well over the years. When his phone went straight to voicemail the first time I called, I got worried. When I called again 10 minutes later and it went to voicemail again, I got concerned. When I used our tracking app and saw his location hadn't moved in 20 minutes, but there were police cars outside the building, I got involved. I was in my office at the FBI building when I made that second phone call, trying to focus on case files, but unable to concentrate, knowing that Marcus was out there making his first big purchase with his own money. I was proud of him, excited for him, maybe even a little emotional about my baby boy growing up and becoming the kind of young man who would work for a month to buy his mother a birthday present. When his phone went to voicemail for the second time, I knew something was wrong. Marcus always answered when I called, always. The only exceptions were when he was in class or when his phone was dead, and I knew he wasn't in class at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. I called Agent Thompson into my office and had him pull up the tracking app. When he told me Marcus was at Sterling and Associates but there were police cars outside, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Get a team together," I told Thompson, already grabbing my jacket and badge. "We're going there now." "Ma'am, should I call the Chicago PD and find out what's going on?" Thompson asked. "No," I said firmly. "We're going there ourselves. If my son is in trouble, I want to see it firsthand." Within minutes, I was in the back of an FBI SUV with 3 agents, racing toward the Magnificent Mile with lights flashing and sirens wailing. My heart was pounding with a mixture of worry and rage. I'd spent my entire career fighting for justice, fighting against corruption and abuse of power. The idea that my own son might be experiencing that abuse firsthand was almost more than I could bear. As our convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside Sterling and Associates, I could see through the large windows into the store. I could see my son pressed against a counter with 2 police officers standing over him. I could see the fear in his posture, the way his shoulders were tensed, the way he was trying to make himself smaller. And I saw red. I'd seen a lot of things in my 20 years with the FBI. I'd seen corruption that would make your stomach turn. I'd seen abuse of power that would make you lose faith in humanity. I'd seen racism and prejudice in all its ugly forms, but I'd never seen it directed at my own child. I'd never had to watch my son be treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while black in an upscale store. The store door opened, and I walked in with 3 FBI agents behind me. The classical music was still playing softly, the jewelry was still sparkling under the lights, but the atmosphere in that store was about to change dramatically. I took one look at my son pressed against that counter, one look at those officers with their hands on their weapons, and one look at Mrs. Patterson cowering behind the register, and I felt a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of 20 years in federal law enforcement, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The silence in that store was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Officer Davis slowly released Marcus and stepped back like he'd been touching a live wire. Officer Martinez dropped his hands from his weapon and took a step backward, suddenly looking very young and very scared. Marcus turned around, and I could see the relief flood his face when he saw me. But I could also see something else, embarrassment, hurt, The kind of pain that comes from being treated like you don't belong somewhere, like you're less than human. "Ma'am, we were just responding to a call," Officer Davis started to say, his voice suddenly much less confident than it had been moments earlier. "You were just what?" I interrupted, my voice still calm, but with an edge that made both officers flinch. "Arresting my son for shopping while black?" Officer Martinez tried to salvage the situation, probably hoping that if he could explain their actions, somehow this would all go away. "We received a call about suspicious activity, ma'am." "We were just responding to a report from the store employee." "Suspicious activity," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. Like a teenager trying to buy his mother a birthday present? Like a young man with his own money trying to make a purchase in a store that's open to the public? I turned to Mrs. Patterson, who was now trying to make herself invisible behind the counter. She was pale, trembling slightly, clearly realizing that her phone call had just blown up in her face in the worst possible way. "You must be the one who called," I said to her, my voice deadly quiet. "You must be the one who decided my son looked suspicious." Mrs. Patterson opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen, like a deer in headlights, probably wishing she could disappear into the floor. I pulled out my badge and placed it on the counter next to Marcus's debit card. The same debit card that had started this whole mess, the same card that represented a month of hard work and sacrifice. "Elena Williams, Director, FBI Chicago Field Office," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of that store. "Now, would someone like to explain to me why my son was treated like a criminal for trying to buy me a necklace?" What happened next was swift and decisive, but not in the way you might expect. Because just as I was about to continue my interrogation, something else happened that made this situation even more complicated and even more infuriating. Robert Sterling, the store manager, came rushing through the front door, having received a frantic phone call from Mrs. Patterson about 20 minutes earlier. He was a tall, well-dressed man in his 50s who looked absolutely mortified by what was happening in his store. But right behind him came someone I wasn't expecting. Captain Rodriguez from the Chicago Police Department. He'd been monitoring police radio and heard about the situation involving an FBI director's son. He'd come personally to try to contain what he already knew was going to be a public relations nightmare for his department. "Director Williams," Captain Rodriguez said, approaching cautiously with his hands visible and his voice respectful. "I came as soon as I heard about the situation. I want you to know that this incident will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate action will be taken." I looked at him with the kind of cold stare that I usually reserved for suspects in interrogation rooms. "Captain Rodriguez, I hope you're prepared to explain to me why 2 of your officers felt it was appropriate to assault my son for the crime of shopping while black." The captain looked at Officers Davis and Martinez, both of whom were now sweating profusely and looking like they wanted to disappear. "Officers, step outside immediately," he ordered. But I wasn't done with them yet. "No," I said firmly, my voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. "They stay. I want to hear their explanation for this behavior. I want to understand the thought process that led them to treat my son like a criminal." Officer Davis tried one more time to defend himself, probably hoping that if he could just explain the situation properly, somehow this would all make sense. "Director Williams, we were just responding to a call. We didn't know he was your son. And if he wasn't my son..." I cut him off, my voice rising for the first time. Would that have made this acceptable? Would it have been okay to humiliate and assault an innocent teenager if his mother wasn't in law enforcement? If his mother didn't have a badge and the power to hold you accountable? Davis had no answer for that. Neither did Martinez. They just stood there, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the full weight of their actions began to sink in. I turned to Mrs. Patterson, who was still cowering behind the counter like she was hoping the floor would open up and swallow her. "And you," I said, my voice like ice. "What exactly did my son do that made you think he was a criminal? What specific behavior did you observe that justified calling the police?" Mrs. Patterson stammered. He was alone, and he was looking at expensive pieces. And I just thought..." "You thought what?" I pressed. "That he couldn't afford to shop here? That he must be planning to steal something? That a young black man in your store must be up to no good? Based on what evidence? She had no answer. She just stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, probably realizing for the first time how weak and prejudiced her reasoning sounded when she had to say it out loud. Robert Sterling stepped forward, looking like he wanted to crawl under a rock. "Director Williams, I am so sorry about this. This is absolutely not how we do business at Sterling and Associates. Mrs. Patterson acted completely inappropriately, and she will be terminated immediately." I nodded curtly. "That's a start, Mr. Sterling. But it's not nearly enough." I turned back to the officers, who were looking increasingly desperate. "You two will be facing a full investigation for abuse of authority, racial profiling, and violation of civil rights. I will personally be filing complaints with your department, with Internal Affairs, and with the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. I will be recommending that you both be removed from duty pending the outcome of those investigations." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Director Williams, I assure you that this will be handled with the utmost seriousness. These officers will be suspended immediately pending a full Internal Affairs investigation. We will also be reviewing our training protocols and our response procedures to ensure that something like this never happens again." Officer Davis tried one last desperate defense, probably hoping against hope that he could somehow salvage his career. "Ma'am, we were just doing our jobs. We were responding to a call about suspicious activity." "Your job," I said, my voice rising to a level that made everyone in the store take a step back, "is to protect and serve all citizens equally. Your job is not to assume that black teenagers are criminals. Your job is not to humiliate innocent people based on the color of their skin. Your job is not to terrorize children who are trying to buy gifts for their mothers." The store fell silent again. Everyone, the officers, the store manager, Mrs. Patterson, even the FBI agents who had come with me, was looking at me, waiting to see what would happen next. I took a deep breath and looked at Marcus, who had been standing quietly through this entire confrontation. He looked shaken but proud, hurt but strong. He'd handled this situation with more grace and maturity than the adults who were supposed to be protecting him. "Marcus," I said softly, my voice gentle for the first time since I'd entered the store. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" He shook his head, but I could see the tears in his eyes that he was trying so hard not to let fall. "I'm okay, Mom. I just wanted to buy you a birthday present. I worked so hard for this." And that's when I almost lost it. Almost let the tears come. Almost let the anger take over completely. But I held it together, because this wasn't over yet. There was still justice to be served. "Well then," I said, turning back to Robert Sterling, "I believe my son has some shopping to do." But before we could proceed with the shopping, something else happened that nobody saw coming. Something that made this already outrageous situation even more infuriating. As Mrs. Patterson was being escorted from the building by security, she turned back and said something that shocked everyone in that store. Something that revealed the true depth of her prejudice and hatred. "You people always play the race card," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I would have called the police on anyone acting suspicious. This has nothing to do with race." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the officers looked uncomfortable with her outburst. Even Captain Rodriguez, who had seen plenty of racism in his years on the force, looked shocked by the blatant nature of her statement. I walked slowly toward Mrs. Patterson, my voice deadly calm. "Anyone acting suspicious? You mean anyone trying to buy jewelry in a jewelry store? Anyone having the audacity to shop while black? Anyone who doesn't look like you think they should look when they walk into your store?" Mrs. Patterson realized she'd just made things infinitely worse for herself. But it was too late to take it back. The words were out there, recorded on the store's security cameras, witnessed by multiple law enforcement officers. "Get her out of here," Robert Sterling said to security, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Now, and make sure she's banned from all our properties." As Mrs. Patterson was escorted out, still muttering under her breath about people like that, I turned my attention back to the matter at hand. "Now," I said to Robert Sterling, "my son came here to make a purchase. I suggest you make sure he receives the customer service he should have received from the beginning." And that's exactly what happened. But not before one more revelation that made this story even more incredible. As the officers were being led away by Captain Rodriguez, Officer Davis made one final attempt to justify his actions. "We were just following protocol," he said. "We've responded to calls like this before. Young black males in upscale stores, employees calling about suspicious behavior. It's standard procedure." I stopped in my tracks. "Calls like this before? How many times have you responded to calls about young black men being suspicious in stores?" Davis realized he just admitted to a pattern of behavior that was going to make his situation much worse. It's not uncommon. "Captain Rodriguez," I said, turning to the police captain, "I want a full review of every call these officers have responded to in the past 2 years. I want to know how many times they've been called to stores about suspicious black customers. I want to know how many innocent people they've humiliated and terrorized." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. "It will be done, Director Williams. We'll conduct a comprehensive review." What that review would eventually reveal was shocking. Officers Davis and Martinez had been involved in 17 similar incidents over the past 2 years, all involving black customers in upscale stores, all based on calls from suspicious employees, all resulting in humiliation and harassment of innocent people who were simply trying to shop. The pattern was clear, undeniable, and absolutely damning. But for now, it was time for Marcus to finally complete the transaction he'd worked so hard for. Within the hour, both officers were suspended pending investigation. Mrs. Patterson was terminated and escorted from the building. And Marcus? Marcus finally got to buy his mother that necklace. But he insisted on paying full price, despite Robert Sterling's offer to give him the jewelry for free as an apology. "I worked for this," Marcus told Mr. Sterling, his voice strong and proud. "I earned it, and I want to pay for it myself." Robert Sterling personally helped Marcus select a beautiful diamond pendant. Nothing too flashy, just perfect. It was elegant and understated, exactly the kind of thing I would love. As Marcus paid with his debit card, the same card that had started this whole mess, I felt a surge of pride watching my son complete the transaction he'd worked so hard for. The new saleswoman who helped us, a young woman named Sarah, treated Marcus with the respect and courtesy he should have received from the beginning. She showed him several options within his budget, explained the different qualities of the stones, and made sure he was completely satisfied with his choice. "Your son is a remarkable young man," she told me as Marcus was signing the receipt. "The way he handled this situation, the grace he showed under pressure, you should be very proud." And I was proud, prouder than I'd ever been. As we walked out of that store together, Marcus carrying a small velvet box, he handed it to me right there on the sidewalk of Michigan Avenue. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I hope it was worth the wait. I opened it to find the necklace sparkling in the afternoon sunlight, streaming down between the tall buildings. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented something important. It represented my son's hard work, his determination, his love for his mother, and his refusal to let other people's prejudice define him or defeat him. "It's perfect," I told him, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. But as we walked down Michigan Avenue together, I couldn't stop thinking about all the other young men and women who had been in Marcus's position without an FBI director for a mother. How many times does this happen when there's no one with a badge to make it right? How many talented, hard-working, innocent young people are treated like criminals simply because of the color of their skin? The investigation that followed revealed some disturbing truths about the pattern of racial profiling in Chicago's retail district. Officers Davis and Martinez had been involved in dozens of similar incidents over the years, all involving black customers in upscale stores, all based on calls from suspicious employees, all resulting in humiliation and harassment of innocent people. Both officers were eventually terminated after the internal affairs investigation revealed a clear pattern of racial profiling and abuse of authority. The Chicago Police Department used this case as a catalyst for department-wide training on implicit bias and racial profiling. They implemented new policies requiring officers to document specific suspicious behaviors rather than relying on vague descriptions like acting suspicious. Mrs. Patterson never worked in retail again. Word spread quickly through the industry about what had happened, and her final outburst in the store had been recorded on security cameras. The footage went viral on social media, making her unemployable in any customer service position. Sterling and Associates made significant changes as well. They hired a diversity and inclusion consultant to review their policies and train their staff. They implemented new procedures for handling customer concerns and established a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. They also created a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing higher education, something positive that came from this negative experience. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. What could have been a traumatic experience that made him afraid to enter certain spaces instead became a source of strength and determination. He learned that day that he had the right to be anywhere he could afford to be, and that his mother would always have his back. 6 months later, Marcus returned to Sterling and Associates, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He bought me a pair of earrings for Mother's Day, and this time he was greeted with respect and excellent service from the entire staff. The experience was everything his first visit should have been. "Your son is a remarkable young man," Robert Sterling told me when I came to pick Marcus up that day. What happened here was inexcusable, but the way he handled it, the way he came back with his head held high, that takes real character. And he was right. Marcus had shown more character in that situation than many adults would have. He'd faced prejudice and injustice with dignity, and he'd refused to let it make him bitter or afraid. The ripple effects of that day continued for months. The story made national news, sparking conversations about racial profiling in retail environments across the country. Other families came forward with similar stories, and several major retail chains implemented new training programs for their employees. Marcus was invited to speak at schools and community centers about his experience. He talked about the importance of staying calm in difficult situations, about knowing your rights, and about the power of having people who believe in you and will stand up for you. "I could have let that experience make me angry and bitter," he would tell audiences. "But my mom taught me that the best response to injustice is to work for justice. The best response to hatred is to spread love. The best response to ignorance is to educate." And that's exactly what he did. Marcus used his experience as motivation to excel in school and to help others. He started a peer mentoring program at Lincoln Park High School, helping younger students navigate difficult situations and build confidence. He also began volunteering with the Chicago Police Department's Community Outreach Program, working to build better relationships between law enforcement and young people in the community. It was ironic, in a way. The same police department that had humiliated him was now working with him to prevent similar incidents from happening to other young people. The scholarship fund that Sterling and Associates created in Marcus's name has now helped dozens of students attend college. Each year, they award scholarships to students who have overcome adversity and shown exceptional character in difficult circumstances. Marcus was the first recipient of his own scholarship, which helped him attend Northwestern University, where he's now studying criminal justice with a minor in civil rights law. He says he wants to make sure what happened to him never happens to anyone else. He wants to be part of the solution, not just a victim of the problem. The necklace I wear every day now serves as a reminder of that terrible and wonderful day. Terrible because of what my son had to endure, but wonderful because of how he handled it and what came from it. Every time I touch that pendant, I'm reminded of Marcus's strength, his character, and his refusal to let other people's prejudice define him. But it also serves as a reminder of how much work we still have to do. Because while Marcus's story had a positive outcome, not every young person who faces this kind of discrimination has an FBI director for a mother. Not every victim of racial profiling has someone with the power to hold the perpetrators accountable. That's why it's so important to share these stories. That's why it's so important to speak up when we see injustice. That's why it's so important to support young people who are facing discrimination and to work for systemic change that will prevent these incidents from happening in the first place. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something like this? How did you handle it? What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Or in my situation? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is far from over. The training programs that were implemented as a result of this incident have now been adopted by police departments and retail chains across the country. The Marcus Williams Protocol, as it's come to be known, requires specific documentation of suspicious behavior and prohibits law enforcement responses based solely on an individual's race or appearance. But perhaps the most important lesson from this experience is about the power of standing up for what's right. Marcus could have left that store when Mrs. Patterson called the police. He could have walked away and found somewhere else to shop. But he stayed because he knew he had every right to be there, and he refused to let someone else's prejudice drive him away from his goal. I could have handled the situation quietly, behind the scenes, using my position to make the problem go away without any public attention. But I chose to address it head-on because I knew that if I didn't stand up for my son, who would stand up for all the other young people who don't have someone with a badge to protect them? Sometimes standing up for what's right is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it means confronting people and systems that would rather maintain the status quo than address uncomfortable truths about racism and discrimination. But it's necessary. It's necessary because every young person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It's necessary because every customer deserves to be judged by their character and their actions, not by the color of their skin. It's necessary because we can't build a just society if we allow injustice to flourish in the shadows. The officers involved in this incident, Davis and Martinez, were not just fired. They were also prosecuted for civil rights violations. Both were convicted and sentenced to community service and mandatory bias training. They were also required to speak at police academies about the consequences of racial profiling. Officer Davis, in particular, seemed to genuinely understand the impact of his actions. In a letter he wrote to Marcus as part of his sentence, he said, "I realize now that I let my assumptions and prejudices cloud my judgment. I treated you like a criminal when you were just a young man trying to do something nice for his mother. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you and your family, and I'm committed to doing better." Marcus, showing the maturity and grace that continues to amaze me, wrote back, "I forgive you, Officer Davis. I hope you'll use this experience to help other officers understand the impact of their actions on the communities they serve." That exchange, which was later published in the Chicago Tribune with both parties' permission, sparked even more conversation about accountability, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption, even in cases of serious misconduct. Mrs. Patterson, unfortunately, never showed the same level of remorse or understanding. In interviews after the incident, she continued to insist that she had done nothing wrong and that the whole situation had been blown out of proportion. Her inability to acknowledge the harm she had caused or to learn from the experience served as a stark contrast to the growth shown by others involved in the incident. The store where this all happened, Sterling and Associates, has become a model for inclusive customer service in the retail industry. They now conduct regular training sessions for other businesses, sharing what they learned from this experience and helping other retailers create more welcoming environments for all customers. Robert Sterling himself has become an advocate for diversity and inclusion in the retail industry. He speaks at conferences and trade shows about the business case for treating all customers with respect and the legal and financial risks of allowing discrimination to occur in retail environments. "What happened in my store that day was a wake-up call," he often says in his presentations. "We thought we were a welcoming business, but we had an employee who was making assumptions about customers based on their appearance. It took a crisis to make us realize that good intentions aren't enough. You need policies, training, and accountability to ensure that all customers are treated fairly." The scholarship fund that Sterling and Associates created has now expanded beyond just educational scholarships. They also provide grants to community organizations working to combat racism and discrimination, and they sponsor youth programs that bring together young people from different backgrounds to build understanding and friendship. Marcus has been involved in many of these programs, sharing his story and encouraging other young people to stand up for themselves and others when they encounter discrimination. He's become something of a role model in the Chicago area, known for his poise, his intelligence, and his commitment to making positive change. But he's also still just a college student, still just my son, still the same young man who worked for a month to buy his mother a birthday present. He plays intramural basketball at Northwestern. He struggles with organic chemistry like every other pre-law student, and he still calls me every Sunday to check in and tell me about his week. The necklace he bought me that day has become more than just a piece of jewelry. It's become a symbol of resilience, of the power of love to overcome hatred, of the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. I wear it to important meetings, to court appearances, to speaking engagements. People often compliment me on it, and when they do, I tell them the story of how I got it. I tell them about my son's month of hard work, about the discrimination he faced, about the way he handled himself with grace and dignity. And I tell them about the lesson we all learned that day, that we can't control how others see us, but we can control how we respond. We can't stop ignorance, but we can stand up to it. We can't prevent all injustice, but we can fight it when we encounter it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the change you want to see in the world. Sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is love. Sometimes the most effective way to combat discrimination is to live your life with dignity and purpose, refusing to let other people's prejudices define your worth or limit your dreams. Marcus understood that at 17 years old. He understood it when he stayed in that store despite being treated like a criminal. He understood it when he insisted on paying for the necklace with his own money. He understood it when he chose to use his experience to help others rather than to become bitter or angry. That's the real lesson of this story. Not that bad things don't happen to good people, because they do. Not that the system always works, because it doesn't. But that we have the power to choose how we respond to injustice. We can let it defeat us, or we can let it make us stronger. We can let it fill us with hatred, or we can use it as motivation to create positive change. Marcus chose to get stronger. He chose to create positive change, and in doing so, he made me prouder than any gift ever could. What do you think? Was justice served? How would you have handled this situation if you were in my shoes? Or in Marcus's shoes? What can we all do to prevent incidents like this from happening to other young people? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because these conversations matter, these stories matter, and your voice matters in the fight for justice and equality. And hey, if you want more stories about standing up for what's right, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, we have more stories that will make you think, make you feel, and maybe even inspire you to stand up when it matters most. If this story gave you strength or opened your eyes to something important, consider leaving a super thanks to help keep these stories coming. Your support means everything and helps us continue sharing stories that matter. Stories that can change hearts and minds, stories that remind us all of our shared humanity. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be. Stand up for yourself, stand up for others, and never stop believing in the power of justice to prevail. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win.